Well, hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. And you'll understand why I'm kind of laughing because it's Monday, December 16th at 5 p.m. Eastern. And the world is in chaos, at least our little world in Canada and in politics. The finance minister resigned this morning in the wake of another cabinet minister resigning. And she is in the process of taking the prime minister down with her. Some today calling her an actual hero because she's the only person who could make him listen to what everybody else in caucus was saying. Anyway, so much on the table today. So we do the warning that before our podcast is over, things may have happened, and we will jump in and tell you, or you'll read about them later. So let me introduce Margaret McCuaig-Johnston. She is a senior fellow at the Institute for Science, Society and Policy, the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Ottawa. And we have Tasha Kheiriddin with us, a journalist and a lawyer and a policy analyst, and she writes for Postmedia and is the CEO of Ellipsium Public Affairs. And then we have, as always, Mark Norman, senior defense strategist at Samuel and Associates. He was vice chief of the Defense Staff of Canada after 40 years of service in our Navy. Welcome to you all.
Hello.
I'm going to start with you, Mark, because of course you're the only man, so that would make you a feminist by definition. Uh, and I would just like to hear you in the broadest sense talk about leadership. You, for many years of your life, was a leader of men and women. What are you witnessing today?
Well, it's a complete and utter failure of the basic principles of leadership. I mean, asking your people to do something that you're not prepared to do yourself, assuming a degree of institutional, or in this case, party loyalty that is beyond the pale in terms of the type of sacrifice that the Prime Minister was assuming that Ms. Freeland would take. Hubris, hubris, arrogance. You kicked over the can, so I'm going to go. As a man, I find it somewhat incredible that yet another incredibly competent and capable woman is basically calling him out for his BS. So there's lots in there, but those are my initial reactions.
I think that's what's so astounding. I mean, as much as people have criticized Chrystia Freeland for her perhaps lack of economic skills and maybe some problem communication skills, this is a woman that he has relied on hourly for the last 9 years, including in the course of election campaigns that he was losing, to put her there by his side. Tasha, the politics of this, of saying, deliver the fall economic statement and then you're out.
It's brutal. And I agree with what Mark said of the taking up the feminist baton here, but it's not even being a feminist. It's just he claims he's a feminist. Right. And just this week was taking Donald Trump to task, essentially saying he shouldn't have been elected twice because there were women running against him and Americans should have voted for them. So the hypocrisy of it is astounding. He wanted to demote Minister Freeland apparently to a ministry without portfolio to deal with U.S.-Canada relations.
Yeah.
It reminded me of Jody Wilson-Raybould when he offered her at the time it was Indian Affairs or Aboriginal Affairs. I'm not sure what they call it now, but that was, And so she didn't want that, and he knew that. And this is the same thing. Unless he thought he would just make her an offer she would refuse. But I can't see why he would make that calculation. He hugely miscalculated on her reaction, just like he did with Miss Raybould. He backed Chrystia Freeland into a corner. And in that corner, she had no choice, I think, but to do what she did.
Well, and he keeps promising multiple people the same job. Mark Carney was supposed to be in charge of our relations with the U.S. and our finance minister. Chrystia Freeland, be in charge of our relations. But if you're a minister and you don't have a department, what that means. Margaret, you worked inside the system for many years. What do you think is going on in the bureaucracy in the civil service tonight?
Well, this is just crazy. My first assistant deputy minister assignment was at Department of Finance for 5 years, and we put out many budgets and fall fiscal updates. And inside, well, there was the lockup, first of all, which journalists all showed up to be locked into the room all day. And for the first couple of hours, I was feeling sorry for them because the lockup would mean that they couldn't get out until 4 o'clock with all this stuff happening. As it turned out, they had delayed the update for quite a few hours because they couldn't figure out what they were going to do with her resignation. Her name would be on all kinds of documents for public.
Yes, they're going to have to take that off for sure.
Yeah, I think there was a delay of about 45 minutes getting the document onto the Department of Finance website.
But people must have just been going crazy inside the department.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's right. And trying to explain to journalists, federal officials trying to explain things like the government is open to reissuing those $750 checks if another party would like to support them in that. The fact that a senior federal official was quoted saying that's political. That's not the official's role. This is just bizarre.
But we didn't even see the prime minister until 5 p.m. when he was swearing in Dominic LeBlanc, minister of everything and who you turn to in a crisis, swearing him in as the finance minister. We hadn't seen him all day. Again, Mark, leader.
Yeah, well, no, exactly. And I'm going to go to that, but I want to just comment on something Margaret said, because the context for this is absolutely mind-boggling. Here we are recording arguably one of the largest in-year deficits in history.
Let's just pause there for a moment. This is the number that came out in the document that everybody was waiting for. Chrystia Freeland had put deficit guardrails around. We will never go higher than $40 billion, and that's outrageous in a country our size.
So let's add 50%.
We hit $61.9 billion. Carry on, Mark. I just want to add that in.
Well done. I mean, that's exactly it for your viewers and your listeners. I mean, that in and of itself is a historic and significantly disturbing event. And it's now lost in, I mean, you could go as far as to propose the ridiculous that this was all just a big distraction. We know it isn't. But it just describes the utter state of, I'm going to go as far as to say chaos.
It's definitely chaos.
And as from a leadership perspective, I mean, this is just the very moment that you need clear, cogent, and believable, credible leadership. And being absent, sadly, without being this doesn't surprise me, given the history of his behavior. Because if it's not an opportunity for him to promote himself and his ego, then he will shy away from it. And clearly, he realizes that he's in a pretty indefensible position, untenable. One could go as far as to say. So,
sorry, go ahead, finish up.
No, that's fine. We'll see where this goes.
What astounded me almost more than anything else in her letter, which was extremely well written, I must say. The old journalist in her was coming out. But she actually referred to the GST so-called holiday break and these checks in the mail to people. I can't remember the exact word, but as tricks, as gimmicks, I think.
Political gimmicks.
Political gimmicks.
Yeah.
I mean, Tasha, that is also unprecedented, that a finance minister who was the hour before she said it, used that phrase, I think echoing what a lot of the population thinks, which is you can't bribe me, trick me with my own money.
And we know Canadians were not thinking that this was anything but that. In fact, I think only 1 in 5, according to the polling that I saw, said that they thought this would actually improve the economic situation. Most people thought of it as smoke and mirrors. So, Chrystia Freeland, she's got still a road ahead of her, and a lot of people had mentioned her as obviously a potential leader. Especially, I mean, she became deputy prime minister in 2019. She became finance minister in 2020. She was really in a position where there was a path to potentially replacing Justin Trudeau. So that path has gotten very muddled, I would say, in the last couple of years. And other people have, thrown their hats in the non-existent ring, but we know there is one really. And so now this is almost staking a claim or staking a space and saying, you know what, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. She might not have ambitions anymore. Who knows? But if she does, she's certainly put down a marker to say, I will not tolerate this. This is a bridge too far. And to call out those gimmicks, implying that she wouldn't do that if she were in a position to have the say, i.e. prime minister, she wouldn't go that route. So I think for her, it was unprecedented. I agree. But I think that it made a lot of sense. And I take, chapeau to her to standing up because, she's forsworn the cabinet position, the salary, the whole deal. It's gone, right?
Yep.
But she stood on her principles.
And this all happened, of course, while we were watching Sean Fraser resign, the Minister of Housing, who took to the airwaves this morning to do the same. Much less critical, of course. He talked about relations with it, wanting to spend more time with his family, but he too had a very troubled record in immigration and then in housing. And the polls kept showing that he would have a very tough time getting reelected. The signals, Margaret, to you that this sends to the world. I mean, yes, I know leaders are falling in other countries, and we've got Macron, we've got Germany and that, but in the wake of the US election, to have this be the event that they are all sitting at Mar-a-Lago looking at, it is extremely troubling.
Well, it is. It suggests a weak prime minister. It suggests a weak government. And, the deputy prime minister and minister of finance quitting on the day of the economic statement, it sends a really bad message to the markets, especially with a ballooning deficit. And the government put no ministers out to speak to the budget or the economic update statement when it was tabled in the House. We had one member of parliament sitting there, and Karina Gould ran in, dropped the statement, said she was dropping the statement, and ran out again. Yeah. And the opposition parties were all saying, wait a second, there's a process here for the government to make a statement. She made a statement that she was dropping it and left. Right. And now we all get a chance to make statements. And so the speaker, I think, realized that he, in consultation with the government, was not making the correct interpretation. But the opposition members then proceeded to use that process of debating the Sustainable Development Technology Canada documents to make their economic statements. And we had Elizabeth May posing questions to the leader of the opposition. It was just wild. And it was, so it looks like we're in Hickland in Canada. We don't know how to run a government. We don't know how to run an economy, a budget. And, and so we're giving a job to a guy who has, he had Minister of Public Safety, democratic institutions, intergovernmental affairs. Whatever happened to Mark Carney? Everybody was expecting that he would appear on Wednesday as the new Minister of Finance. Did he call the PM up and say, whoa, 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 this is a big mess. I'm not going to be your Minister of Finance to step into the middle of this thing that you've left me.
Well, nobody wants to be the next killer, right? The next high profile woman. And I mean, that would be Carney day one. So you took out a
woman.
He's the godfather of her children. This would be
yes. And so we have Dominique LeBlanc, who's already got 3 day jobs, being given Department of Finance. I know from being there, that's a huge job.
Yeah.
And it's a detailed job. You can't just read briefing notes in the evening and try to, get away with it. This is, I feel very badly for my country, I must say.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are doing that. I know, Tasha, you were trying to jump in there. Please do.
Oh, well, I was going to say that I think that what all of us feel is what Donald Trump said, which is that Trudeau's acting like the governor of the 51st state as opposed to the prime minister of a country. It's actually very worrisome, the timing of that too, because we know that the U.S. is going to bring in tariffs. Donald Trump is going to bring in tariffs. The question is, how do we respond, right? And that response, the premiers have been running around like chickens all week saying different things, partly because Trudeau has no authority over them. And why doesn't he have authority? Because of the things he's done and the way he's managed or mismanaged various files. And also this week when he went out on a limb and said, like I referenced earlier, that Donald Trump shouldn't have been elected because we should have voted for a woman instead. The kinds of things you don't do as a leader of a G7 country. And so
because it's insulting the voters, not just the leader. Yeah.
100%. So Trump looks at this and yes, I mean, if you were interested in making Canada the 51st state, wow, there's kind of opportunity there, right? It's very worrisome. I think we're at an important juncture for our country, for trade and national security vis-a-vis the U.S. And if they think we're mismanaging the show, what is to stop them from saying, or Donald Trump, who does whatever he wants anyway, to saying, oh, well, you know what? Let's just go and take that space.
Cheaper and easier. Mark, to that point, and I'll come to Margaret later just about the Arctic specifically, because you wrote about that this week, Margaret. But to you, Mark, on the general question, there's been an increase in our proposed defense spending. We don't know when and if that will ever land. Promises about helicopters on the border and upgraded security and all of this at a time when our own military has stretched the limit and 16,000 people shy. The police forces all over are dealing with rampant crime. How are we going to do this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't have that silver bullet response. What I would say is to build on what Tasha and Margaret were both saying with respect to, there's an element of this that goes beyond the pressing issues that we're discussing, and it goes to a deeper issue with respect to substance. A long time ago, one of my captain mentors taught me the distinction between the steak and the sizzle, or to use a Western reference, all hat and no cattle. Right? But as humorous as those comments are, they really speak to the essence of one of the major problems we're trying to deal with here, and it goes to it's institutional behavior. It's behavior at the national level. We do not behave seriously, and so to your broader question about security issues. We've said before in our discussions, these are really serious issues. They require really serious solutions. These are you cannot just wave your hands. You can't just throw a few billion of a $61 billion deficit at the problem. You've really got to knuckle down and show some leadership. And that goes back to the questions you asked earlier. We have had a glaring lack of leadership on the serious issues. We've probably had, I'm going to be generous and say, way too much leadership, in quotes, on the frivolous sizzle and the hat, to go back to those two metaphors. So, I don't have a prescriptive answer as to how we fix this. There's lots of ideas in play, and it's going to take a lot of work, and we're not going to fix it overnight. And the biggest, most pressing issue from my perspective goes right to what the three of you were just saying. We need to send signals to our closest friend, ally, and trading partner that we are not the joke that they think we are. And unfortunately, the events of the last couple of weeks, punctuated by the last few hours, are not helping our cause.
Yes, when we thought jumping on a plane to Mar-a-Lago looked a little odd. Imagine when they witnessed this today. Margaret, I want to go to your point. Just, you're writing about the Arctic, and I think if you asked most Canadians who were sitting down, they would think it was ours, because we talk about that all the time, until we had our foreign affairs minister say it was kind of a North American Arctic or some such description. And again, it's in the category, whether it's the southern border or the northern border, these are things we should be doing for ourselves. It really isn't about Donald Trump or anybody else, although that's an important part. But if we're to be a grown-up country, we need to be able to secure our borders.
Yes, absolutely. And we see major efforts now in the Arctic by Russia and China working together. Tens of thousands of Russian troops in the Arctic region, now holding military joint exercises with Chinese, PLA and PLA Navy. And so, we've seen the presence of China in the Arctic, in our Arctic, mapping the seabed of the Northwest Passage, operating a 5-year review of the security of the Arctic. Why would they be doing that? And we found our military has found buoys, the surveillance buoys by the Chinese, monitoring who's going through, including what submarines are going through. That's very alarming for the Americans. It should be alarming for us. And so the Canadian government did put out, I think this year, 3 documents that start to get a handle on it, but don't put enough immediate money into it, in my view. It's ramped up in the out years far too late.
Yeah.
And so we've got the defense policy, we've got the Coast Guard strategy, and now we've got the foreign policy strategy for the Arctic. And that gives us more engagement with the Nordic countries, all of which, by the way, are members of NATO, except Russia. With Finland and Sweden joining NATO, that's a really good group now in the Arctic Council, which continues to meet without Russia. So there's a lot that is being done to try to get a handle on it, but we need to ramp it up much faster.
Do you know what Melanie Joly was thinking, whether it was purposeful or perhaps just a language issue when she talked about the Arctic and called it a North America? I mean, is she looking for joint funding, or is this a policy announcement that we've given up our claim to sovereignty?
Oh, I don't think it's giving up our claim, but it is Canada and the US must work side by side on this. And so I thought that was a good casting of it, as long as the Americans come in beside us and don't just roll their eyes. I think, they need
say we've heard this before.
Yeah. So we need to show up in the Arctic with our military along with theirs.
Yeah. Tasha, to the other border, which is a focal point now, a lot of issues there, which is people with very questionable motives, if not bad track records, crossing both ways. Us being kind of a leaky sieve for people to come into Canada and backdoor into the US, and people fleeing the US, I don't think because they're upset about Trump, although there might be a few movie stars coming, but really, going for safe cover at this point if their track records are really bad, the criminal records. The Prime Minister talked about helicopters. To my knowledge, I don't think we have enough to be patrolling 3,000 or 4,000 miles of border, but we'll ask Mark about that in a moment. But just on the politics of it, what do we have to do to convince first ourselves, but also the Americans that this is for real?
Well, this goes back to what Margaret was just saying. These are things we should be doing anyway. right? We should be dealing with our borders anyway. We didn't need Donald Trump to tell us this.
No.
We know that there have been thousands of people that have been apprehended by the Americans trying to get into the U.S. who have exactly that. They pose some kind of threat, whether criminal or terrorist, to the U.S. We also know that we experienced already a huge outmigration from the U.S. of migrants seeking refugee status in Canada in the first Trump presidency, when Justin Trudeau famously said, welcome to Canada, diversity is our strength. So you can expect that now, with Trump wanting to deport up to 10 million people, those people aren't going to sit around and just wait. I was reading today that Honduras and other Central American countries are expecting an influx of people as they go south. But there's also people who will go north. And going north here, actually, under our third safe country agreement with the U.S., if you're undetected for 2 weeks in Canada as a migrant, right, undocumented migrant, or a person with overstayed their visa or anything else, you can claim refugee status. You can do that. So if people if they manage to stay under the radar for that period of time, they can then make a refugee claim. You can't just make it if you walk across the border anymore. That's not allowed. And at airports also, presumably there you have papers or you wouldn't be getting on the plane. But that's a loophole that should be closed. And there have been groups. There's one in the U.S. asking for it to be closed, a lawyers group. The Bloc Québécois asked the government to deal with it. Bupkis, nothing is happening. They have to get the cooperation of the Americans, of course, to do that. It's a joint agreement. So that goes to the question of how seriously they take us. If they don't take us seriously, they're not going to sit down and negotiate that agreement and make the necessary change. And time's also ticking on Donald Trump, who may not want to, because he may like the idea of people just leaving the U.S. and coming here and being our problem and not his.
Yeah. Well, and that's an issue, Mark, for sure, because we've seen the numbers. The government has conceded that despite the advice of their own bureaucrats, they kind of opened up the well and let a lot of people in, and that led to the housing crisis and the healthcare crisis and all of that. But we've got a lot of pressure points right now. Ukrainians who are facing a very difficult and brutal end, and some are defecting and looking for more places to go. The government has promised to open up the doors to Gazans who are fleeing. They're sort of the latest victims that we're going to embrace. And then the Syrians, many of which we have here already, who have not integrated well, according again to the government's own documents. And who knows what will happen in that country at this point. There's optimism, but it might also go the other way.
Yeah, and so, we've discussed what I characterize as the Venn diagram between politics, policy, and planning. And, these unfortunately are glaring examples of where, for whatever reason, one of those P's tends to override the others. And we end up with an extremely politically biased decision without the supporting policy or plan, or vice versa. The reality is, and I'm not really going to, the immigration issue, and as Tasha was speaking, we're dealing with a potential influx. While we've already said that we have to figure out how we're going to manage a bunch of people that are currently in Canada, and we don't know how to get them out of the country. And as I interpreted the last government statement on this, we were going to basically leave it to their own, honesty and integrity to remove themselves. So, again, it's just ludicrous policy making, and especially when you're ignoring advice. So, and as it relates to the border, to your previous question, there are solutions to this, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but we're in a crisis now, and good things seldom come out of a crisis, but every once in a while you can get people's attention. And
as Rahm Emanuel said, don't let a good crisis go to waste, right?
Right. But, there are technologies, but at the end of the day, a lot of this is going to come down to capacity. And when you underinvest in these key institutions that allow you to function as a country, as a responsible actor in an international community, and you assume risk which is just a fancy way for saying you push off the problems and you don't make the hard decisions for decades and decades, this is what happens. Again, the chickens come home to roost, so to speak. There aren't enough border service agents. There aren't enough police officers of the federal and provincial level. The military could potentially support this in a short-term way, and I'm sure they're doing some crisis planning to figure out how they could, but there's limitations to that. And yes, to your point, I mean, sure, let's go out and buy some equipment that we should have had long ago, and it just smacks of another example of crisis management as opposed to good policy and good planning.
And I'm wondering if we can even use the phrase management. I mean, honestly, watching it today, it was definitely crisis, but you couldn't get a swearing in ceremony on time with one person, right? It just looked chaotic from the top. What do you think, Margaret, about what this means? There will be growing pressures on the Prime Minister starting immediately, some decisions about prorogation or calling an election or resigning and having a leader, however it all comes to pass, we have to carry on in a very deliberate way, with no downtime, because we are dealing with both domestic issues and international issues that are a lot of uncertainty, but most particularly the Canada-US relationship.
Yes, that's right. And I have a big concern now about the number of holes in the cabinet. Maybe we'll still have a cabinet shuffle on Wednesday, but it looks, all the holes make it feel like a sinking ship. And who's in charge? It doesn't look like the Prime Minister has control. He's a control freak, we know, and his office is. But it looks like he's losing control or has lost control. And I doubt very much that he's going to resign from all of this. And the reason I say that is I don't think he would want to give Chrystia Freeland the satisfaction that her resignation brought about his.
Right.
And so I think it's much more likely that he would prorogue. I doubt that he would call an election, because we all know where that would end up with the numbers as they are now.
Yeah.
I think he's just going to try to skate through this. The public servants are going to have to just roll with the punches. But we need people to attend international meetings with, as Mark says, with seriousness and being taken seriously. I can't imagine a meeting with China where they know all about how our government is unraveling.
And Justin Trudeau was supposed to be the host of the G7 meeting.
I was going to say, yeah,
Yes.
and that's going sideways too.
Right.
Indigenous groups are upset.
So I agree with your point, Margaret. That's it. But those kinds of signals outside, but also inwardly. I mean, we've been kind of looking because of the shenanigans in Parliament and all the rest of it, as they all do to each other in June and December. But the legislative agenda, you get the sense that bureaucrats have just said, you want some bill about the GST that's going to cost billions of dollars and put small businesses out of work in the wake of just coming back from the pandemic. Okay, we've tried to tell you this is not a good idea, but you're the boss and we're just the guys that write the paper.
Yeah, I'm going to jump on that one.
Okay.
Sadly, in my long career, I have been on the bridge of a ship where a captain was over their head. And it was obvious to everyone that they were over their head. And it is not a good place to be.
Yeah.
You're dealing with the dangers that you can imagine at that moment in time. But that's kind of where we find ourselves. And so, yes, we have a system which is supposed to be robust enough that it can deal with, it's designed to deal with transitions in power and government. And we have all the right mechanisms But one of the assumptions of these robust mechanisms is that there is a coherent, cogent, and logical evolution of leadership. And at the moment, what we're seeing is a vacuum of leadership and a leadership, and I'm using the word intentionally in parentheses, that is focused entirely on self-preservation and survival. And that is not an effective way to run the bridge of a ship or anything else for that matter. And so, those are my thoughts. It's not particularly inspiring, but at the end of the day, the problem is that the current leadership can hide behind those procedural issues.
Well, and speaking of over your head, I mean, we've also now we're all kind of in the hands of Jagmeet Singh, Tasha.
Oh God. So Jagmeet Singh today said that he called on the prime minister to resign in question period.
Yeah.
But he specifically said, when asked by reporters over and over, so are you going to have a non-confidence vote? Or are you going to vote against the government if there's a non-confidence vote? He said, all options are on the table. What does that, square that circle? Okay, you can't. What it means is, speaking of self-preservation, the NDP is into self-preservation. Because they know the minute a conservative government comes in, which it likely will after the next election, they will have nothing to say, and they'll be relegated to, maybe third place, maybe second at this point. The Liberals are so low, so they could be official opposition, but it won't matter. The Conservatives would have a very big majority if there was election held today. So they are, Jagmeet Singh is not helping anyone. So I think actually, and I'm going to disagree with Margaret on this one, I do think Trudeau's going to go. I don't think it's going to go in the next, 24 hours, but I have heard it might be the next 48. It could be over the holidays. It could be, maybe he'll send out a tweet and say, I'm leaving, as opposed to, facing the cameras, something he wouldn't like to do, because it's not his style to be hated. He hates that. And the thought, I think, of him, he has to look forward to an election campaign where he's going to be dogged by protesters and vitriolic hatred, and his own troops, a lot of them may not even turn out to support him. So does he want to go through that exercise? Really, when you think about it?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the caucus meeting scheduled for today, apparently the number of people signing their names to letters that we saw a month or so ago, that's all increased dramatically. Now, I mean, he didn't care then. I don't know if he'll care now. So, Margaret,
sorry, I'm interrupting. Let's game Tasha's scenario for a moment. Let's just game it.
Okay, go.
Okay. And I'm not interested in Johnny's and Susie's and Mary's and Bobby's as to who's going to fill what spot.
Right.
So we get an interim leader of some sort. All right. We in a nautical term, we stop the flooding momentarily. The
plug the dike.
Right. We fill all the holes. The pumps are running. We get the water level stable. Then what? And I'm not asking any of my colleagues.
No, it's rhetorical.
I'm just saying. It's a temporal kind of short-term issue. I don't see how they regroup in any significant way. That many of them have either, like we saw today, they're either distancing themselves or they have remained so loyal that they're tainted. So anyway, I'm just saying, we can probably get out of the immediacy of the crisis, but it doesn't fix the problem. You've still got...
Jagmeet Singh would likely support them. That's the key. You just said and I'll let Margaret, I know you want to hop in a sec, but Jagmeet Singh said, the implication is he would support the Liberal Party in power under a different leader. So if they have a leadership, this could drag things on theoretically until October.
Yeah, and they're going to have. The only thing I was going to throw in is it was supposed to be the big Liberal fundraiser tonight, the Laurier Club, which is
party. Yeah, there's a party tomorrow. I think
fundraiser. It's hard to imagine. Not stateside people saying to Kamala Harris, like, there's no money unless you sign a piece of paper saying you'll never run again for anything. You've kind of got the feeling. Anyway, Margaret, go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, so that big event for fundraisers in the Liberal Party will be quite a subdued,
I would think,
group. the Liberal Party tomorrow night will be a very sad party. I think this has put a lot more wind into the Conservative sails. And I think if we look ahead then to an election, because, that may come sooner rather than later, we're in for massive fiscal reductions.
Yeah.
I would remind you of the late 90s when Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin decided to surmount the fiscal deficit of $45 billion at that time. So that was kind of similar to the 40 billion we're supposed to be in now.
Yeah.
They got rid of all of the programs in science and technology, all the company supports, a lot of the social programs. They downloaded a lot onto the provinces, who then downloaded onto the municipalities. It was many, many years before we saw that back to normal. And I was an ADM when we were in surplus. And even then we were being very careful about how we managed that surplus because we knew what a problem it was to be back in deficit. So I think we're in for, when we think about defense spending, for example, in the Arctic or anywhere, we need to do more of that. NATO's talking about having 3% as the target.
Yeah.
We can't even make 2%.
Yeah.
And so, we need to be concerned about what would happen with that spending in the fiscal framework. So I think there's some big questions coming at us in the next year. And, but I think this has given a huge benefit to the Conservative Party and to Pierre Poilievre.
I was reminded today somewhere of when Paul Martin was doing exactly what you describe, and he said, I want 5% from every department. And Jean Chrétien, his prime minister, backed him up and said, and if you don't put 5% on the table, I'll take 10. And, just as, and they didn't always get along or see eye to eye, but they knew the relationship between those two people had to work. And if you were going to be serious, it had to work. And that again seems to be a problem, Tasha, with where we are right now. Dominic LeBlanc is the finance minister, but as Margaret points out, he has 70 other jobs, right?
Right. And it's not clear which ones he will actually be doing, because if there was a leadership race, you'd need an interim PM. And it looks, everyone sort of thought if there's going to be one, it would be him. He's not going to seek the leadership of the party. He would step into Trudeau's shoes as the caretaker until a permanent leader is chosen. So who knows what will be on, what little nameplate will be on his desk as of after Wednesday of this week. I think that the big picture here, of course, that we have to look at, though, is exactly the relationship we have with the U.S. And we talked about it earlier, but that is really what all these decisions are important for, because the clock is ticking on Donald Trump coming into the White House. And if you think it's going to be hard managing fiscally now, how is it going to be when we have tariffs of 25%? How is it going to be when the Americans, drop their tax rates into the basement and our companies can't compete? It will be terrible. So that's, unfortunately, the Conservatives have the wind in their sails. I agree from an electoral standpoint, but the longer this drags on, the worse the inheritance they'll face will be. And that will make it very difficult. Tough choices all around, tougher than even Chrétien, I think, had to face.
Well, and it was troubling to see the ministers all cheering the decrease in the interest rates, when the Bank of Canada is kind of prepping us to get ready for another round of inflation if this spending
and the dollar is at 70 cents.
Exactly right. Go. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
I was just going to, this is, it's a poison chalice for the next government, to the point that everybody's making here. And there's going to be even less flexibility, my instinct tells me, than we think there is today. And when you look at the pressures, the only hidden benefit to the reductions in the interest rate are the payments that the government has to make on its own debt. There's a bizarre, economic hidden benefit here. But to Tasha's point and Margaret's, that these are compounding problems, and and they're all interconnected. So and I guess the last thing to make it even rosier, it's a closed system. It's dollars in, dollars out. Like the only way you make it bigger is to expand the economy. But then, by the way, if you expand your economy, then your liability to meet your NATO spending targets goes up. So this is not an easy fix. And although yes, in the short term this is advantageous politically, we fast forward 2 or 3 years. This is going to be a tough place, and I would like to believe that with strong leadership, we could all think we're in this together. And that's how we kind of started in COVID. But by the end of COVID, everybody was turning on each other, and it wasn't a very pretty scene.
It wasn't pretty. I don't want to end on a totally depressing note, but I guess I will, because, I've been reading the polls, and I don't mean the party polls as much, but the disconnect that Canadians are feeling from their country, from their identity. Citizenship ceremonies have been kind of, moved online, and come on in, diversity is our strength. We don't really protect our borders. And there's, if you promote your Canadianism, somehow that's implicitly racist. And, the only thing that we keep hearing is our kind of what we've done for decades is, well, at least we're not Americans.
Yeah.
To me, this is not an affirmation of your identity or your sovereignty or anything else to say, well, at least we're not that. And I don't know how we get from where we are to the other side and something that's a little more positive and stronger. Margaret, do you want to just share a thought on that?
No, actually, I'm American as well as Canadian. So I can always move to the other side of the border.
Yes, you can. And we'll come and visit.
we will continue to have sensitive social policies. I mean that in the context of a progressive but fiscally conservative country, I think. We need to have that balance, because I don't think we want to go completely to the side of those that are just cutting away at our support systems. We need to have communities that are supported, and we need to welcome people. We need immigration, but we need controlled immigration, not massive numbers of people coming over the borders. And so we need to get a control of that ahead of that happening. And we need to have strong business supports, tax supports for companies to prevent them from going over the border. This is the critical time to have a strong finance minister in place. Yeah. And we've just lost that today. And that's going to take some maneuvering to try to get back to that place. And I'm not sure that it's Mark Carney anymore.
Yeah. Mark, we need to be able to fund and afford the promises we make. There's no sense inviting people to come on down if they're living in a tent city, committing crime to live.
Yeah, well, this goes back to the comments earlier about being serious. And we just, sadly, what you're characterizing is a recurring sense of almost systemic incompetence. But I want to go beyond that. What we need a unifying either idea or set of ideas that if we could accept that our defining identity was that we weren't something else, that's probably got to its best before date. Okay. And it's time that we figure out who we are and figure out who we want to be when we grow up, to put it bluntly. We're still living off of a lot of the hard work, investment, and legacy of previous generations. And
Of
what
World War II. We
Right.
heard the
Well,
Prime Minister say it the other day.
right. And even after that, right. And we have to figure out how, as we continue to evolve as a nation, we figure out what that looks like and why it's important, not just because of the material and transactional benefits of it, which, to your point, have been eroded significantly over the last few years. So we've got to find it. I don't know. It's wrapped in some sort of patriotic idea. It's got some maple syrup on it somewhere.
Yeah, for sure.
And as a special
moose in the
sauce.
background. Yeah.
Right. But
Big moose.
we got to figure it out. We got to identify it, and we've got to celebrate it and make it our own. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to see the kind of everybody's in it for themselves
kind of thing
mentality, which is not who we are or who we want to be.
The last word to Tasha on this. What do we want to be when we grow up, or what are we going to be when we grow up, if we do?
Well, the challenge for Canada is that we aren't grown up. We are a young country. Countries around the world are rediscovering their roots, for good or bad. But you see Europe in particular looking and saying, we want to be the countries that we have been for hundreds of years, right? We can't say that as a nation. That is part of our problem, is that we are a country in constant evolution because we were built by immigration at the very beginning. We are constantly welcoming new people who are different, who have different ideas about how they want a society to be run. And we do not ask them to conform to a specific set of values, as Mark said. I sound like Kelly Leach with her values test, but it's not about a test. I know somebody has a column that says Kelly Leach was right or something that, no one's written.
No, but it is, if people are fleeing certain lifestyle, you don't want them to bring the war and the battle here.
Right. And you would think when people leave a place that was so bad to them that they don't want to replicate that where they go next. But we haven't given them anything to hang on. In fact, what we've done instead is denigrate our country, especially this government, for the last, 9 years now, and say how bad we all are because we were built, bizarrely, on immigration, which at the time was colonization, because that's what immigrants did in the 1700s and the 1600s. That's what they did, right? And we recognize that mistakes were made and bad decisions were made, but that doesn't mean the people here today are bad. I don't accept that. And that's what we're being told instead.
And
that
it can't be our starting
this.
point. Yeah, it can't
We have to get past that. That's where I think we have to start, is getting past that.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Honestly, just wonderful to hear you all three think out loud about this stuff, because when we're in the middle of this crisis and chaos, it's nice to know that there are people there thinking through some very tough stuff. So our thanks to Vice Admiral Mark Norman. I know you're retired, but I just keep saying, I like to say that because you spent 40 years leading in this country and dedicating your life to it. And Margaret McCuaig-Johnston, an American and a Canadian. And I did know that about you. And I always love your response to those questions. It's great. Who is a senior fellow at the University of Ottawa. And Tasha Kheiriddin, who is a journalist and a lawyer and a writer and a thinker. And we appreciate all the stuff you put on the record regularly in your columns in the Post and other places. So I'm going to say Merry Christmas. We'll try and make it merry. Who knows what will happen? And again, we recorded this on Monday. Who knows what has happened since you'll turn on this pod and hear a great conversation, regardless of where the politics have gone. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks to all of you for joining us. There'll be another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin very soon.